if we had elections right after that, I think it would have been a huge mobilization factor. But I think now it's kind of the message has been out for so long. It's almost like just like another thing, like fatigue, the same way we saw with like COVID, how people are just tired. I mean, it's exhausting to think about like your rights being taken away, or like if I'm like applying for grad school and like I'm not going to apply in states that are red, I guess, because I just I don't want that volatility.
Welcome to Deep Dive with me, Sean C. Fettig. So the midterm election is just around the corner, November 8th, and today's episode is dedicated to that election and what's at stake. I'm going to warn you, this introduction is going to get a bit heavy, but I think it's important. And what follows it, my interview with the president of the College Democrats of Washington, is very interesting and very lovely. Regardless of whether someone agrees with the policy positions of the Republican Party, of which frankly it's difficult to ascertain, you have to ask yourself, in this election, when you cast your vote, if you can support a party that poses such a threat to your country. And I mean this. Today's Republican Party is an existential threat to the United States and its people. This is a party that advocates overthrowing the government, that openly states that America is not a democracy and actively takes measures to strip democratic governance from our society, and targets traditionally underrepresented groups for not just derision, but violence, queer folks, folks of color, women, immigrants. They've also vilified Democrats and turned them into targets, not just as electoral opponents, but as enemies of, quote, real America and Christians. So I want to make one more point here before moving on. Republicans have been normalizing violence and radicalizing their base for years. And their response to manifestations of that normalization to actual political violence makes it even worse. Immediately following the home invasion, an attack on Paul Pelosi from an assailant looking for his wife, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, a frequent Republican target, Glenn Youngkin, the Republican governor of Virginia, stated at a rally that America should send Nancy Pelosi back to San Francisco to be with her husband. And his supporters laughed and cheered. This was a day after an attacker broke into her home looking for her and beat her husband with a hammer, fracturing his skull, and after years of Republican attacks on Nancy Pelosi as the devil incarnate. Republicans make light of, they generate mocking humor that normalizes violent behavior, dismisses violent behavior, minimizes violence against their political opponents. And when violence happens, it doesn't matter if the attackers are avowedly right-wing or not, because that's what everyone will start doing, asking, was this person a Republican, or can he somehow be characterized as someone suffering from mental illness? But that misses the point. When you normalize violence, violence ensues, and it can come from anywhere against anyone. This is not shocking or difficult to understand. In all other areas of our lives, we know this to be true, but Republicans have infantilized their base to such a degree that they accept no responsibility for any of their words or actions, which of course means that anything can happen. It's why the real snowflakes, the real babies, are white Republican men. They are the ones screaming and yelling and attacking people and throwing tantrums whenever they don't get what they want. I mean, January 6th? Grow up. These are grown people, and they refuse to accept responsibility for their behavior and the consequences of their dangerous rhetoric. We expect more of our children, frankly. You know, there's a sick irony to Republican rhetoric. Republicans would have us believe that if a child learns that I'm gay, that I'm grooming that child to become gay, him or herself. And even more absurd, that if a child meets a gay person, then they just magically become gay themselves. And they want us to believe that if people learn complicated facts about history or society, that they're being indoctrinated. Perhaps they themselves or their supporters are that malleable, but I think generally human brains can process complicated information. So more infantilization, that people can't hear complicated things without imploding. They want us to believe that all Muslims are extreme fundamentalists trying to change our way of life through violence and tyranny, as they themselves speak in biblical, end-times language to rile up their evangelical base, morphing their followers into violent extremists, mindlessly terrorizing other people, completely detached from any Christian ideals or values. But when they characterize people they disagree with as enemies, as threatening your way of life, as anti-Christian, as replacing white people, as evil, like they have with Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, George Soros, Hillary Clinton. When someone hears that and reacts, when someone commits violence against Republican targets of hate and subjugation, then Republicans immediately deflect, argue that there's no place for violence in political discourse, and that their language is simply free speech that in no way motivates people to target and physically attack anyone that they have deliberately demonized and dehumanized. I mean, come on. They know what they're doing. They know that when you tell fundamentalist Christians, or people that call themselves Christians anyway, when they tell these people that someone is the devil, they are tapping into a justification to use violence against that person, that it is someone's duty to kill the devil. This is what Republicans do. They turn people into demons and then act surprised when some people think it's their patriotic Christian duty to rid the world of these people. They make people think they might be martyrs and heroes for killing liberals and Democrats. Do you really believe that the country, the world, will be safer under Republican leadership? Look at what they do to people they disagree with, to other Americans. For years, Republicans played with fire, ginning up hatred and violence with their base, turning a blind eye to or mitigating violent rhetoric and behavior from fringe elements within their electorate, white supremacists, anti-Semites, homophobes, misogynists, and anarchists. But they're not playing with fire anymore. They are the fire. Republicans are not fit to hold elected office. In fact, they're tearing the country apart. And so, with a very consequential election looming, I challenge you to consider this. With a Republican Party that has demonized liberals and Democrats, fellow Americans, so much that they have crafted a constituency that will never vote for a Democrat, with a Republican Party that has gerrymandered districts so tremendously that they never need to convince any moderates or Democrats to vote for them because they can win without carrying a majority. With this Republican Party, is it any wonder that they refuse to offer a platform? Like, what do they stand for? What are their policy preferences? Is it a surprise that the Republican Party refuses to debate in presidential elections? They don't have to because they don't need a majority vote. Is it shocking that they run a slate of candidates with absolutely no experience or knowledge or sense of seriousness about running a country? People like Mehmet Oz, J.D. Vance, or Herschel Walker. They do this because they have gained their own supporters. They can do whatever they want because they know that you will follow along, and that even if you don't, they've stripped you of any voting power to change it. Recently, Steve Bannon said, when asked what it is that he wants to replace the existing American democratic system with after he and his soldiers tear it down, he said that he doesn't know, that the work of some people is to tear it all down, and the work of other people is to build something in its place. If you are a person considering voting for Republicans, I want you to ask yourself what you expect will happen if the country is run by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Sarah Palin, and Lauren Boebert, people that can't string together a coherent sentence and have never offered anything in the way of serious governance, just violent rhetoric and taunts. Do you think they can competently administer Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, delivery of the mail, creating a budget, anything? And when people like Xi Jinping of China, or Vladimir Putin of Russia, or Kim Jong-un of North Korea attack our friends and allies, maybe even us, do you seriously trust Herschel Walker to know how to respond in such a way that we avert nuclear disaster and complete subjugation of the Western world? So let's talk about what might happen based on the few indicators we have available to us. Typically, we like to rely on polls to tell us what to expect, but the polls are all over the place right now. However, a few things suggest that Republicans may be in good shape to take Congress. First, history tells us that the president's party loses seats in the first midterm after taking office. Additionally, the economy is lagging, with high gas prices, high inflation, slowing home sales. While all of this is related to external factors outside the direct control of the president, and here I'm talking about Putin's war in Ukraine driving up the prices of food, oil, and gas, and remnants of the botched response to the pandemic that is still dragging on the economy, people still hold the party in power accountable. So this paints the picture that Republicans should do well. But this is muddied by a few things this year. One, Republicans have chosen a uniquely awful, unqualified, mega conspiracy-driven slate of candidates up, down, and across tickets nationwide. Two, the overturning of Roe v. Wade animated people against Republicans and their anti-choice agenda, in a way that a court opinion hasn't done in recent memory. And 3, polls have really underperformed at gauging voter intent when anything related to Donald Trump is involved. And Trump can't keep his fingers off this election. All of this makes it really difficult to see a clear path for either party to clean victory on November 8th. So nothing is certain. Nothing is foregone. All right, finally, you made it. We get to the interview. Today I'm talking to Natalie Kenoyer, president of the College Democrats of Washington. I want to get a sense of what she's hearing from the people she's engaging, college Democrats and folks she's working to convince to turn out for Democrats in this election. So we talk about this, and we also talk about what issues seem to matter to voters on the ground. The threat that Republicans pose to the country, how she and her friends think about going to red states after Roe's being overturned, what a Republican win this year might mean for the future of the country, and especially her generation, how young Democrats feel about an aging Democratic leadership, and how people can register and vote in Washington state. If you like this episode, or any episode, please feel free to give it a like on your favorite podcast platform, and or subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. And as always, if you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, please feel free to email me at deepdivewithsean@gmail.com. Let's do a deep dive. Natalie, thanks for being here. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing good. Nice rainy weather, so enjoying that.
Surprising Seattle weather. I want to talk about, the College Dems of Washington, of which you are the president, and I want to talk about, some of the work that you're doing, and also specifically what it is that you're focusing on in your, voter registration drives, or what you're hearing from folks on the ground. But before we get there, I think I'm interested in knowing, I came of age as a Democrat at a very different time. So in the late 90s, the first person I could vote for, or president I voted for, was Clinton.
Yeah.
This is a very different time. And, young Democrats probably care about things that are very different from the things that I did when I was young. So I'm wondering, what's the draw for you to the Democratic Party? What interests you about what the Democratic Party is doing or trying to do?
Yeah, it's just, there's so many things that kind of like Democrats are fighting for that just like speak to me. And I first got into politics with like women's rights and feminist like history. I was learning about that in like middle school, and just kind of realizing that my school wasn't really doing enough to educate us on like birth control and like those types of issues. And then I'm really interested in cannabis policy, which is so random, but that's like something that's really big for me, and just the connections that cannabis policy and drug policy have with racial issues in this country and our legal system, and related to criminal justice reform. And so there's a lot of things. And yeah, I feel like the Democrats are like really just fighting for all of it. And so that's what I like about them. It's a one-stop shop for everything.
I remember when I was about your age, somebody that I worked with, around an election cycle was like, you're liberal because you're young, but, as you get older, you're going to become more conservative. And that has not been true for me. But I think what he was saying was that, the real divide between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is primarily on something like economics and maybe stability, meaning, once you own a home and you have a family, you care more maybe about crime. But even that's a false dichotomy. Like, Democrats don't care about crime. And so that was the primary distinction between Democrats and Republicans at the time, right? It was like on the economy, maybe on crime, I'm not sure. But I don't know that holds water today. What do you think are the primary distinctions between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party?
Yeah, well, I think now, January 6th was such a big deal for the United States. And I think we just kind of like don't want to acknowledge it too much. But I think that Republicans are threatening our democracy in the United States. Like, that has been made clear. And so that's at least one distinction for me.
A small one, a minor distinction between.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like, we have Republicans running for Senate in Washington that have been backed by Trump. And I think it's over 50% of Republicans running in their races nationwide are like have in some way denied the election or raised doubts about the election. And so in this day and age, which is like, I feel like even from when I was little, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were not as just so divided as they are now.
To some degree, if you're going to have a party system, you want your parties to be distinct from each other.
Yeah.
At the same time, you do want them to all embrace some basic norms. And that's where I think, and this is what you're getting at, is that the Republican Party has just essentially jettisoned the idea of democracy as being, a fundamental value that we all share.
Yeah.
But I did notice that you said, and I've been hearing this a lot, so I guess I want to get your take on it. You did say we don't want to emphasize this too much, January 6th. And I get the sense that the reason is because for some reason, it doesn't play as much, especially to Republicans, in the same way that we think it would. Like January 6th was, to me, a coup attempt, right?
Yes.
That's shocking. It should be shocking to all Americans. And yet, for some odd reason, it's not a primary concern of a lot of voters. And in fact, a lot of voters have expressed, exhaustion with it, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, is that why we don't want to talk about it too much? And how does that land with you, that like something like that could happen and a huge chunk of the population, well over, I think it's over 70% of Republicans are just kind of shrug about the whole thing?
Yeah. I'm a history major. And so I'm always like reflecting on US history and also like just how my history courses in high school and like public education were not that great. Like we're taught American exceptionalism in our public schools. And so I think as a nation, we don't want to believe that we're susceptible to a coup. Like we're like, oh, like that's a like Latin American thing, or like that's something that happens in other countries that like have had democracy for like 10 years. I think us as a nation don't want to believe that happened. Like we just don't want to come to terms with it.
I mean, I do think there are people, I think, that don't care. And that's scary, right? Like people that are actively, because the narrative for some Republicans now is, look, we never were a democracy, we're a republic. And so they don't care that we might not rely on elections, or, I guess we've already embraced the idea that majority will is not what America is about anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the other group that I think is equally scary, but for a different reason. And that's, it couldn't actually happen here, right? They think there are enough guardrails in place. And I think this is what you were alluding to, right? Like that happens in countries that have very young democracies or have strong histories of unstable government or coups. And I think it's this group of people that will be unpleasantly surprised when, if, and I suppose when it does actually happen.
Yeah.
But I do think that group of people makes up both Democrats and Republicans. I do wonder, like, how do you reach that electorate, that group?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I don't know. Like, you just have to kind of keep bringing up the attempts by Republicans to, like, overthrow our government. And, geez, I think it's taken me, like, a year to convince my boyfriend that he should vote in this election.
Really?
He's, like, one part disillusioned voter and one part, like, doesn't want to think that this country is, like, in trouble. And now he's like, oh yeah, we're in trouble. You're right. So I think it takes persistence and eventually we can get to people. But, like some people might never come around, and that part's a little scary.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about college Dems. So what's some of the policy stuff? I guess there's two branches here, like the policy stuff that College Dems of Washington is doing. So what are you emphasizing? And then what are you doing to like reach out to voters and engage voters?
Yeah, well, right now we've been talking a lot about like housing inequality and just, there's always like new things in the city about like rezoning and building like affordable housing. And that's something that's really important to like us in Seattle. And then this is something that's impacting, Washington statewide. And I think people are a little bit hesitant to see that right now. But yeah, so like housing inequality, we've been really hitting home that women's rights, women's healthcare, and abortion is on the table for this election. So that's something that, I even talking with my friends, we're talking about it every day. Like, what's the election going to look like? Like, because like Republicans have a bill that's, if they win, they'll pass banning abortions, and then
nationwide.
Yeah. Bill. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's really impending. So, yeah. And then I guess also, common sense gun laws and public safety type things. And yeah, I think there was like some rumor about a serial killer in Seattle that was debunked, and like it was like fake news, but it definitely brought up issues of, are we safe like when we're walking home at night? And so it's so complicated, but we're really like thinking about how this is going to impact our daily lives and the daily lives of our community members. And so fighting hard. But that's on the policy. And then as far as what we're doing, we're like out there knocking on doors and making calls. And we're working on doing like a statewide college, like Young Dems phone bank that we'll kind of do as our College Dems of Washington, just to target young voters. And, we don't have a chapter out in Eastern Washington. So also focusing some of our efforts out there just to help make up the slack and show the state party that young people care and we have a presence in politics.
So you have, the College Dems and the Dems of Washington generally have policy positions and the platform that they're running on. But when you're talking to people, when you're going door to door and engaging voters, maybe primarily younger voters, what are you hearing from them as being the things that are top of mind that they seem to care about?
Yeah, well, for young voters, it's definitely abortion, and also it's abortion, and then it's kind of like the economy and just gas prices and inflation. And we're really feeling it. Like, I work a part-time job and I'm trying to pay rent and like feed myself at the same time. And so just like inflation really can impact how, like what I'm actually, I guess my final take home is once I pay for all that. And so that's kind of the two, I think, biggest issues impacting young voters right now. And yeah, I'm hoping it brings out enough people to vote.
So you mentioned you mentioned abortion, and I guess I want to talk a little bit about that, because from a strategic point of view, I think there was a little bit of Republicans don't want what they say they want. And so in attacking Roe v. Wade, I think there was a general kind of feeling that Republicans don't actually want to overturn Roe v. Wade, or they don't want to outlaw abortion because that's not a winning issue for them, right?
Yeah.
And so there was, I think, some belief that, when Roe was overturned in the Dobbs opinion, that this would animate voters. And we saw this happen in Kansas in a way that would really boost Democrats in the midterms. And I think we did see an uptick for the party immediately following that decision, and for, probably through like mid-September. But more recently, where, polls are seeming to show that is fading. And so I guess I'm wondering what you're seeing on the ground. Are people still talking about this as, top of mind issue for them? Or are they really shifting to what seems to be, at least in the media, more of a focus on the economy? And then how do you counter that then? Do we just become used to horrible things?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the winds are so, like, I don't know which way it's going to go, because there's so many different things that are all happening like all at once before the midterms. And so, yeah, I think we did see, like an uptick in gas prices around this area. And I think that definitely impacted, like, people were more minded towards the economy. And now it's like slowly going down, and that's great. But, like, people are, like a classic political science class is like, the voter is only going to remember like the last 3 months. And that's kind of like, I think that's so true. I just think it happened at the beginning of summer. And if we had elections right after that, I think it would have been a huge mobilization factor. But I think now it's kind of, the message has been out for so long. It's almost like just like another thing, like fatigue, the same way we saw with like COVID, how people are just tired. It's exhausting to think about like your rights being taken away, or like if I'm like applying for grad school and like I'm not going to apply in states that are red, I guess, because I just I don't want that volatility.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm gay and married, and clearly there are some states we would just never, ever live in, as of, the last couple of years. It's just not safe for us.
Yeah.
To the point where there are some states I don't even want to have a layover in. I don't even know how to characterize this, but because I absolutely agree, like timing one of elections is super important. But two, there are some things that you consider to be fundamental. And I'm not even talking about abortion for the sake of talking about abortion. I'm talking about abortion in the context of liberty and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that even something as fundamental as that can fade in such a short period of time. And then when you place that against what seems to be more important, which is gas prices, I'm not even saying that tongue in cheek. It really is. People mention gas prices, right? It's, in one hand, you have gas prices, which are very volatile. And frankly, one party or the president really has very little to do with that.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have something like fundamental, like liberty or freedom. And whichever is just nearer the election is the one that wins the day. Just seems so odd for how we do politics.
Yeah. And I think, the state party in particular have like really been hitting home just how close this election is for like abortion. Like, it's literally like, we need to keep all of our seats for Democrats. And then it'd be great if we could flip 2 seats, and then we can make abortion federally guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
As a like woman, I feel like it's definitely on my mind and my friends' minds. We're always talking about it, and always just like, if abortion goes, then so will like access to contraceptives. And then, it's, I don't know, like, I've never been pregnant before, but I'm in college and I definitely couldn't raise a child. So it's just, I don't know, like the mobility of women. We've been really discussing like what the negative impacts of the election will mean in the long term for women. Definitely women of color are just going to be disproportionately impacted. And that's just a step in the wrong direction, like leaps in the wrong direction.
We began talking a little bit about this, but in a lot of ways, this election, so this midterm election, feels like maybe the last opportunity, to really counter the authoritarian tendency and direction of the Republican Party, that if Republicans do win Congress this cycle, that they'll burn down the entire democratic system. And in doing so, there's not really a path back, because if you elect election deniers, then they just deny elections in future, right? And so I guess, is there any part of your messaging, how do you message this in such a way that it actually does, resonate in such a way that, I really do need to consider this and vote?
Yeah, I think, some parts of it don't resonate with people, and that is thinking about long-term impacts isn't, something we always are conscious about reflecting on. And so I think to really hit home for people how dire this is, I think the main thing has been talking about just how deep those like election denying roots go in the Republican Party. Like it's not just one or two Republicans nationwide anymore. It's the majority of Republicans. And I think that messaging is what's resonating with people, whether or not we'd like it to be happening at all.
So the Democratic Party. So there's a criticism of the current Democratic Party, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. So that leadership is too old. And here, Pelosi's 82, Chuck Schumer is 71, President Biden is 79. So one, they're too old, and maybe by extension, but maybe not, also too moderate for maybe the Democratic base, and that they're also bad on messaging. How do you respond to that?
Oh gosh. As someone who's in college, college Democrats, young Democrats, I want to see more young people in politics. I think it's, young people are traditionally like agents of change. And so I think we need more young people in local government and state government and federal government. And I mean, I do agree, like President Biden and, like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and like others are too moderate. At this point, it's like, who else am I gonna vote for? I don't want to vote for someone that is actively working against my rights and against others' rights. And so even though they're more moderate than most, they're still moving the needle. A lot of times people don't think about kind of gradual change. And as an activist myself for like certain issues, like I want, like for cannabis, like I want federal legalization already. Like I think President Biden would have done it if he was more like Trump in his use of executive orders. But at the same time, like there are leaders and they're Democrats and they're the ones that are kind of like at least keeping our rights in mind, I guess, and trying to protect those.
So outside of, college Dems, the organization, what are you hearing from progressive college students anyway? What are you hearing from them about party leadership? Do you get a sense that young Democrats generally are happy with leadership, or do you get a sense that they would prefer maybe a younger, I don't want to say the word vibrant, but a younger, more kind of connected to the base leadership?
Yeah, I think younger politicians, at least from what I've seen being in college, are usually the ones that end up resonating with my peers. We're not thinking Biden is the best like Democrat we've ever seen. I think, like AOC was really big, or we just had John Ossoff here. Mm-hmm. And even, like 35 is way younger than like most people. But we always love having like young people in leadership because those are the people that I think we can really relate to, and like we have similar life experiences too, which I think is important. But yeah, I definitely I feel like a general consensus that leadership is too old, and yeah.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that they're not good, right?
Yeah.
It's the same as saying, like, again, me as a gay person, it means something to me to see gay people run for office, right? And I guess I wonder, how much do young voters connect to people that are more than one generation older than them, right?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I guess, like, Patty Murray is a great example of someone who, at least from what I've seen, is really, really great at connecting with young voters in Washington. Oh gosh, me and my friends, we were like, she's just like a grandma not in like a bad connotation, but like she just is very, I don't know, has a genuine personality that makes us like, she really feels like it really feels like she is like keeping us in mind when she's doing her job. So mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like there are older people in the Democratic Party that we can relate to. I guess I'm thinking of like Elizabeth Warren or like Bernie Sanders are a little bit more progressive or socialist. And I think those people I've seen, at least in my experience, have been great at connecting with young voters.
You mentioned a couple of folks, but are there any Democrats in the party that excite you as future standard bearers? So people you know are coming up now that you see as potential progressive leaders in the future.
I have really been excited about Stacey Abrams. She just has that like community organizer energy that I wish I saw more of in politics, and like she really seems like kind of like a great leader, and so I'm excited to see where she goes in politics, and I'm interested in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and her journey has been really interesting, and especially in the beginning when she first won, I felt like that was really inspiring to just see how she really was like a young person breaking into this kind of like rigid party leadership in Congress. So those are just a couple of names, I guess.
If there's one thing that seems to be shared across all voters, and I think good examples of this are, you know, like AOC and Donald Trump as well, you know, their journeys, is that there does seem to be an appetite for somebody or people that are running as are total outsiders and running very atypical campaigns. You know, Trump ran a campaign, he behaved very atypical to, you know, a politician. And AOC is the same, right? They speak to their voters differently. They run their campaigns differently. They engage differently. And I'm wondering if that says something about, you know, not only the electorate, but what we could maybe expect more of on both sides of the aisle. Obviously, on the Republican side, it seems terrifying, but, you know, but I mean, if AOC, you know, and Stacey Abrams as well, you know, were the future of, you know, Democratic politics, I think that bodes relatively well.
Yeah. I've reflected on this a little bit, and I think voters crave someone who's genuine. I've like worked on campaigns, and I did like social media for a little bit, and it's just like I feel like in social media nowadays on like campaigns, it's great to just have that kind of like AOC style, just selfie, unedited talk to the camera about like who you are as a candidate and what your issues are. And that like informal style, I think, is something that really resonates with people, as we're just looking for someone I think we're always looking for someone who's genuine and really gonna do the things they say they'll do.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think? What happens in the midterms? Do Democrats hold the House and or the Senate? This is not a hope question.
Yeah, I am, you know, hopeful that Democrats will hold the House and Senate. I think we do have some important issues on the ballot that have the potential to mobilize voters. But at the same time, you know, like often, like if we say, oh my gosh, like we said Hillary's going to win, and then Democrats didn't come to the polls.
Well, to be clear, and I keep telling people, Hillary won.
Yes, she did. She won the popular vote. Yeah.
In any other country on the planet, she would have been the president.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Imagine where we'd be now.
I do play that game, which is it's a horrible game to play.
Yeah.
So a lot of people write off midterm elections. They either are really unaware of, you probably wouldn't be amazed, but maybe for listeners, how many people actually have no idea that the entire House is up for election every 2 years, or who's on the ballot in midterm elections. And, you know, we often hear this story that, you know, the president's party loses in the first midterm election. And so I think that does a disservice to this midterm election, because people kind of then run it through the lens of normality, right? Like it's normal if Republicans were to win. But I think thinking ahead to 2024 and, how that election will be conducted is so contingent upon this midterm election. And it makes me worried that people are not adequately weighing how the outcome of this election influences the election in 2024 when they might actually care more, right?
Yeah. The elections in this country, politics is a never-ending cycle. And so I think I've worked to vote every election, and that's something that I decided when I was in high school I would do once I turned 18, and not everyone gets that experience. And then if it's not like a habit, it doesn't feel as dire. Or like if you believe, there's always like, what is one vote gonna do? I feel like so much could be done for education on like how to engage civically or what exactly happens in each election. And more could be done on that in the United States to kind of address these. I feel like we hear about it every year, just trying to predict what will happen. And it's just, people are just not sure if their vote will count or not, or
they truly believe it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah. And,
it'll correct in 2 years, and I don't know that that's true. Do you want to make a final plug for the Democratic Party before the midterms?
Well, yeah, get out and doorbell. And if doorbell is not your thing, text banking is my favorite. and there's phone banking, and I love in postcard writing and sign waving and rallies. And there's so many ways to get involved. And if you can't get involved, vote. Like the bare minimum that we need you to do is vote.
And I'll include in the show notes some contact information for maybe college Dems if people have any questions.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Can you provide maybe some voter registration info for anyone, obviously in the state of Washington, if they were interested?
Yeah, so ballots dropped are in the mail already. I got mine. And so if folks haven't registered yet, there's still time. You can do it at various locations. So usually like City Hall. And honestly, like you can look up voting registration near me on the internet. Mm-hmm. And then you'll also be able to vote in person. They print out a ballot for you. I did this once, and you just fill it out at the table, and there's never a line because we do mail-in ballots. So it's great. And
completely fraud-free too.
Yeah. Gotta add. And yeah, so you can register to vote all the way up to the day of the election. You just gotta go in person. If you haven't got your ballot by Halloween, I like to say, that's probably when you should be looking into how to get a replacement ballot. You can print out one online or call the voter protection hotline, and they can give instructions on how to get a ballot. Exciting time.
Exciting and terrifying.
Yeah.
Final question for you. What's something interesting you've been reading, watching, listening to, or doing lately? And it doesn't have to be related to this topic, but it can be.
I've been really trying to go to a lot of Democrat events. And so I actually just met John Ossoff at University of Washington, and that was really great. It was just like a crowd of students around him, maybe like 4 people deep. It was very casual. And then also like got to meet Elizabeth Warren last weekend, and it's always fun to see who we can bring out to Washington to support our candidates. So that's, politics side. Till November, I'll be on the Democrat grind, as I like to say. So
totally understandable. Natalie, thanks for the conversation and the information. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a great time.
This might sound like a trope, but I truly believe that this election matters more than maybe any of the past 50 years, for all of the reasons that came up in this episode, both in the introduction and my conversation with Natalie. This election very well could be the last truly free and fair election in the United States. If mega candidates win, election deniers, those who have vowed to overturn the will of the people, they can wreak havoc in the 2024 election and carry out the coup they started in 2020. And then it'll be too late to put it all back. It can't be undone. So I truly ask you to consider, when you cast your vote, what's at stake here. Is the temporary pain of high gas prices, and it is painful, but is it worth the wholesale demolition of American democracy? Is it worth the long-term pain that comes from that instability, especially if the people at the helm can't even tell us what they hope to build after they ruin us? American government cannot be solely about the ruination of another Americans, of your political opposition. If it is, then it is certainly the ruination of the entire country. Not just the lives of your opposition, but of your life as well. So get out and vote. I've dropped some resource information in the show notes to help you register, vote, and obtain information about the election. Okay, check back next Friday and every Friday for a new episode of Deep Dive. Chat soon, folks.